Yeah, I think this is cool. Very, very cool. Good to be here with the Roots. Spent the whole day with the Suits. You're my people. I'm not gonna lie. You're my people. Yeah, so I'm Bubbleman, Marcus Richardson. Been doing this cannabis thing for about 28 years now. Joshua will kind of give you a little bit of an introduction. Started my activism in Manitoba, got into hemp. We got hemp growing in our province for the first time in 73 years. It only took 9 months too, which was amazing because our biggest supporters were like, that'll happen when hell freeze is over. Clearly they hadn't lived in Winnipeg for very long. Hell freeze is over about 4 times every winter.
Hi, I'm Bixby. It's great to meet you. Just press and hold the big
company from that called Manitoba Harvest, and they sold it for a bunch of money a couple of years ago to an American company, and I moved to BC and became a grower. I was growing at the time already, started growing around 1991, and was, when Hillary Black started the BC Compassion Club, I became one of her first growers and a big proponent and a supporter of the civil disobedience that she was practicing and helping palliative and terminally ill patients acquiring cannabis back in 1997, kind of before it was really, before it was okay in the eyes of the Suits. Moved to BC shortly after, started Bubble Bags in 1999. Been doing that for, I guess, almost 20 years. In a couple of months, it'll be the 20-year anniversary of Fresh Headies and Bubble Bags. And recently, in the last 5 years, I've opened a company in Jamaica called Cannabinoid Research and Development. We're doing some clinical trials there with our partners, UCAN. We have products, CBD products, THC products, and a multitude of activated and non-activated cannabinoids that are suspended in a terpene mixture. And so we're doing clinical trials at the University of West Indies, and we've just recently got our licensing there for our Tier 1 licensing and our R&D license there. And in the last couple of years, I have become a part of Whisper Technologies, which is with Daniel, who's also on the panel with me today. And we're looking to really sort of commercialize and industrialize the scalability of water extraction and kind of, you know, maintain that that sort of traditional hash aspect of, you know, the LP world, licensed production facilities, which the majority of them that are run by the Suits I was mentioning earlier tend to just be like, let's just get a CO2 machine. And so they all kind of are doing the same thing. And so with Whisper Technologies, we're really looking at bringing the scalability of water hash to large-scale growers, both organic and non-organic. And so that's with Whisper Technologies. And then finally, I'm involved with a company called Embark, which Mike West is also a part of. And we're building a very large extraction facility that will specialize in a whole variety of processes of extraction on a large scale. So that's just a little bit of kind of history to catch you up to what I've been up to. I'm going to pass the mic to Mike, and then he'll pass it to Daniel. So I just want each of them to kind of give you a little bit of history and where they come from and how they got to where we are today. And then we'll have a good little conversation about the glandular trichome and hashish.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for inviting us. My name is Mike West. I'm a biochemist, both in the States as well as up here. I got fascinated with cannabis just because my sister had epilepsy, so I've been growing since I was a teenager, extracting over a dozen years, various different ways as the industry's kind of evolved. Back in the days where we were extracting brick weed all the way to the days of present, where we're fortunate enough to be able to grow large-scale gardens, both in industrial hemp licensed farms as well as recreational and medical farms. So built medical labs in 9 states and rec labs now in 6. CBD labs that are processing a couple thousand acres. And a lot of that is done and looking at scale, and a lot of it is done using solvents that I personally don't like to consume. But at the same time, there are obviously a multitude of different types of consumable products and alcohol of various grades and qualities. And you know, we're here obviously this is a much smaller event because we're here to produce the highest quality cannabis in the market. And the way that that's done is by taking care of the earth, growing and processing as much material as I have. Every time I see organic material, the terpene levels are higher. I've dropped. We've dropped genetics into multiple different gardens, grown multiple different ways, and had the soil microbiota, which is all the microbiome in the soil, whether they be bacteria, fungal, or even insects, are going to contribute to benefiting the plants and producing the precursors that are used in cannabis. So there's a ton of different ways of consuming and producing and manufacturing cannabis. We won't get too deep into that. We'll focus on the sustainable extraction sides. So as the industry grows, we want to be able to make every farmer capable of not only growing the highest quality medicine, but then turning it into, turning either some portion of the buds or some portion of the byproduct into high quality resins. And I think a lot of that, as the industry begins to have to get incorporated with food health safety codes, we got to make sure that we're doing it in facilities just like kitchens are. That way we can produce quality products. And that can be done. We've seen states that pass incredibly stringent rules and states that have passed fairly lenient rules, and then those rules change to kind of better fit the market and better fit the consumers. Some of us have seen states actually shut down medical programs or limit medical access, which I think is a travesty. But being able to have open source groups that can educate each other is going to prevent that, because there's no way that any government can stop farmers or home medical patients from cultivating their own. It's an unwinnable war. So I built a bunch of labs, and now I'm fortunate enough to be helping Mark build one up here in BC, where we don't have to worry about the feds seizing our assets. So it's a great journey, but we obviously want to do it in a sustainable fashion. So,
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. My name's Daniel Lentella. I grew up near here in North Vancouver. Was lucky to have access to Rate Cannabis for all the time that I've been using it. I went to Montreal to study biochemistry, so got 2 biochemists in the council here. So I got interested in using cannabis to treat cancer at that time, and wanted to do medical research on that side. But this was between 2011 and 2013, and really the stigma was too strong, and there was a big pushback from the academic community and the universities to not want to be associated with that kind of research. So I left that kind of frustrated. And then in 2014, I got connected with the owner of Whistler Medical Marijuana. So the last little while, I've been kind of skirting between the suits and the roots, and it's a good place. And I developed the oil extraction program there using bubble hash. So we started using bubble bags. And as you know, in the Canadian legal system, you can't sell any smokable extracts yet or real concentrates. It has to be in an edible carrier under 3% THC. So we ended up taking the bubble hash from fresh frozen hash and infusing it directly into the carrier oil, and then came up with a process to basically infuse, decarb in one step. Then we separate the resin out from the oil, and because we never dried it, we basically take fresh plant, freeze it, go directly into the oil. We have more terps in the oil than if you dried that same product when you compare it to the THC level. So it's really trying to capture the fresh essence of the plant into your extract. So we've been doing that, selling that product. I got Whistler Medical Marijuana licensed. I did all the regulatory work, did the labor, along with my partner Krishna over there, and then basically trained more people to take over the system, and now have started my own companies that were a bit of an offshoot from Whistler Medical, which is Whistler Technologies and Whistler Therapeutics. And as Marcus said, Whistler Technologies is working on scaling up that bubble hash production. So we were using, the Bubble Now machines and the bubble bags, but it really was not going to work at a large scale, and basically worked with an engineer, and we came up with a design for a scaled up, all stainless steel sanitary extraction system. And when we tested that, it just worked really well. And then I was still working for Whistler Medical Marijuana. We decided it would be a good idea to form a new company and try and really push the research and development of this extraction system. So since then, we've come up with another product we call the terp reactor, which takes that fresh frozen bubble hash and does this oil process. And then we're looking to take that oil and really develop it for the medical market through Whistler Therapeutics, and really sticking, as these guys have said, to organic and sustainable procedures, because if we're trying to produce medicine, we can't be harming the earth at the same time. It's a bit of a paradox. So taking a step back and really taking a good think at our approach and how our production systems can improve the health of our ecosystems and thus the people who live in them, at the same time as producing medicine for patients who need it now. So yeah, I've kind of come a long way since I was studying for biochemistry, and really didn't know where I'd end up, but really happy to be here now. So yeah, that's introduction to everybody. So
I think the only other thing I would mention that you guys will all be quite happy with is that Whistler Medical is, they grow organically. So it's one of the few licensed production facilities in Canada that is actually producing organic plant matter. So all the bubble hash that Daniel is making over there, infused into his terp reactor and with the oil, it's all organic. So I figured you guys would want to know that. I guess, for me, 20 years ago, I came up with this idea. Well, I didn't come up with this idea. I came across this idea. I didn't invent water hash by any means. I sort of followed the history back to Neville, one of the breeders. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Neville's Haze. I guess back in the 90s, maybe even the 80s. Sorry, it would have been the 80s for certain. It was an unknown American. It was a guy from California, go figure, that had told Neville that the glandular trichome heads are dense, and due to their density, they're still affected by gravity and water. It was a very simple thing to tell him. Neville never did anything with it. He actually, I'm pretty sure he ended up telling Skunkman Sam about it. So Skunkman Sam and Rob Clark ended up playing around with it for a little while. Sam has this extraordinary method of producing 99.9% gland heads without the use of water. For the rest of us mortal humans, we require water. Water creates a transfer chamber, and it makes it very easy that any single person in this room could absolutely produce the purity that I'm talking about, because with the water, it just keeps everything afloat, while only really the glandular trichome heads that have broken off of their little capitate stalks are allowed to fall and sink in and fall through into the screen. So Skunkman Sam in 1988, along with Rob Clark, took an advertisement out in High Times magazine, and it was called Sadhu Sam's Water Extraction. And it was basically send them $10 to their P.O. box in Amsterdam, and they would send you a small little instructional that said you can take this cannabis, put it in a jar, shake the jar up, leave the jar on your windowsill, and the resin would sink, and you'd see the sandy mixture at the bottom. And so that was kind of the beginning of water extraction. By 1997, a Swiss gentleman by the name of Reinhard Delp was living in California as well. Go figure. California. What are you guys up to down there? Busting it out. Always part of the history. So Reinhard Delp created a machine called the ice cold extractor. This was really the first machine that was ever created for water extraction that was beyond, Sam and Rob's instructional. It was a substantial improvement, and he came to the Cannabis Cup in 1997, and he made a deal with Mila Jensen, who was the pollinator lady at the time. And while she signed a deal with Reinhard, a couple of days later, a couple of good friends of mine, I hadn't known them at the time, but Eldon, rest in peace, Eldon, a beautiful man, wonderful hash smuggler, spent a lot of time in Nepal smuggling hash into Europe, and he was sitting on the couch with Mark Rose, who's been my manufacturer for about 17 years now, and they looked at Reinhardt's machine, and they said, Eldon actually said, 2 5-gallon bag, 2 5-gallon size bags with screen bottoms, and you've got the same thing. And Mark came up with the name Isolator on the spot, and he began to manufacture those bags for Mila. And so a few months later, after having my own troubles, I was arrested at a roadblock here in Vancouver with almost 20 pounds of cannabis and a bunch of cash, a little bit less than 10 grand. And I had been helping the BC Compassion Club. I had been growing for them, and I had been procuring cannabis for them, and I kind of felt like it was the right thing to do to help people that a lot of people weren't willing to help, and I was always willing to stand behind Hillary, but I ended up getting in trouble, getting caught at this roadblock, having to go through court. Got my wife arrested as well, and she sort of said to me, you know, hey, is there any way you can kind of be a part of this cannabis thing without getting arrested? And I was like, oh, you know, I'll try. I've never figured that out before, but I'll try. And so I went to Amsterdam and I met with Mila. I was hoping on actually becoming a distributor for Isolator bags. That's how I knew about water hash. And basically, we had a kind of not good meeting. I knew her for a couple years prior, but I got her on a bad day. She got mad at me. She told me to leave the store. And I came home very disappointed with my tail between my legs, and my wife was like, well, hey, why don't we make our own bags? Which is, if you know my wife, she's very quiet, she's very shy. Only a few times in life she'll just say something and I'll know, whoa, that's like a major crossroads, like we have to go with that. I had no plans on producing my own bags. I had no plans on, you know, spending the next 10 years having everyone attack me that I stole the idea from Mila. It took me a long time to learn the actual history that they had actually stole the idea from Reinhardt. Based on his machine, I ended up in a lawsuit with this guy for 5 years, and in the end, I paid him out, and you know, I made sure that Reinhardt got his piece from all of that, because it really was the right thing to do. The machine did spawn the bags, there's no doubt about it. The ice cold extractor spawned the isolator bags, the isolator bags spawned bubble bags, and bubble bags have since spawned, I don't know, 100 or 200 different brands. People always come up to me and, oh, are you upset about that? And of course not. I'm really super happy people are making water hash. It was an amazing thing to offer to the community that didn't involve chemical solvents, that didn't involve the dangers of blowing up, of burning your house down, of killing other people. I mean, before butane extraction came out, really the most dangerous thing about cannabis was probably the DEA. Like, there was nothing more dangerous about cannabis than those guys, and then all of a sudden kids were blowing themselves up and blowing their hands off and perishing in these fires, and I just thought, wow, like, I have a mission, and I'm not against the hydrocarbon extraction process done properly by, you know, chemists in a lab in a class 1 Div 1 room, but, you know, when you're just kind of failed chemistry in high school and you're in your dad's garage, you know, blasting cans through a PVC pipe, that to me was just wow. So I, you know, and also at that point in time in my life, I was growing cannabis, and I also was no longer using salts. I hadn't learned the level of it that you know, I've since been exposed to, especially after meeting Joshua. We did a wonderful regenerative soil show on Hash Church. I'm not sure if any of you guys saw that, but much of that was inspired by Joshua, and of course, Josh and Kelly, who just walked in, Dragonfly Earth Medicine, were a huge part of getting all these incredible people together to sort of, you know, understand. From my perspective, I never understood the science of it deeply, but I understood that I had traveled all over the world. I had made water hash with all these different cultures and all these different people that had been, you know, looking at cannabis as a sacred plant, from, you know, in India, making it with the sadhus, in Jamaica, making it with the Rastas. And what I noticed was that these sun-grown cultivars that were grown organically, you know, in their natural habitat, were just, they produced a terpene expression that I have never seen recreated under lights with salts. And so that was really, you know, one of the inspirations for Joshua having me speak today, because I said, well, I don't, you know, these guys all probably know more about the science of regenerative soil than I do, but, you know, I guess I come from the perspective of, you know, I really did help popularize, you know, one of the sort of safest, you know, ITAL ways of making hash that has, I mean, did it not change our community, this thing? Like, we, this is a big changer from blasting, you know, chemicals or getting the oil caps back in the day, the bottle caps, to be able to A, stand on the shoulders of the giants that, you know, got all of us, me in particular, to this particular place, but to be able to share it and to take it to the next generation of people who are going to take this and you know, expand it. I just kind of wanted to share a little bit of that history with you guys, because I'm not sure of how aware you guys were of the water hash experience or history. I don't know, do you guys want to maybe grab the mic and talk for a little bit, because I've kind of been going on and on?
Thanks for sharing that, that's cool.
Yeah, for myself, when I realized I didn't have to break bricks up or soak them in ethanol and vapor off the ethanol for shitty black oil, it changed the way that you could create medicine for family members. So it was something that I didn't have as a child, didn't have the access to the quality medicine, but you know, now that we actually are getting to a point that we have laws in place, we can actually grow quality medicine. You know, then you know, a lot of people, whether we be growers or the companies that are going to come, they're going to have to make that choice on what type of products they're going to create. You know, and from there, there's a variety of different manufacturers that'll sell you equipment, but obviously any one of them are trying to create products that they can sell. What every one of those equipment manufacturers cannot provide is quality source material. And that quality source material is going to completely determine your end product. If you don't have quality, you won't produce that quality out. And then, so even, you know, if you go into the land-rich regions, if those places are going to produce resins, when you bring those seeds back, they don't grow exactly the same. So you want to be able to grow cultivars that can actually produce well in your region. You know, test them so you do see the analytics and you can actually develop a biologic plan, so as you see different nutrients dip off or different terpenes dip off, you can actually identify different nutrient deficiencies. And that doesn't mean you want to go pour nutrients or powders. There's a multitude of different organic methods of producing good terpenes. And most of it includes, you know, compost teas, fungal teas, protozoa teas, you know, different composts of different nutrients, which I'm sure we've talked about in other talks, so I won't go into. But as the industry's evolved, right, we want to be able to produce high-end products. My personal favorite is dry sift, but I'm not going to argue over that point between these two, because analytic testing says that when you wash the plant material, you can actually produce a cleaner product. It just has to be produced in a sanitary method. And that sanitary method, you know, includes the drying of that hash material, as well as taking care of that to reduce potential contamination. A lot of that's, you know, drying your hash in a clean or dry environment, which is different than the way that I do it at home, to be honest. When I make hash out of the plants that I grow for my personal head stash, it's done in a relatively rudimentary way than when you do it in a commercial lab. But obviously the nice part is as we can develop big systems, we can actually get, you know, stainless steel systems with all the sanitary valves, pipe in clean water, and actually produce the bubble or hash that they can then dry in sanitary environments. So it's my opinion that, like, as we have the analytic testing to be able to have large grows, do analytics on what's the best way to dry it and what's the best way of curing it, then you're going to start to see different variations come out, just like you see it in different wines. So between the two bubble hash makers, what would you guys recommend for, you know, obviously taking wet plant material and drying it on a kind of more commercial scale? Obviously there's going to be some freeze dryers, but what do you have to address when you're dealing with, I guess, drying large amounts of resin glands? Because we want to protect the essential oils within those resin glands, right?
I definitely think we're going to see a lot of freeze drying at the larger scale. There's a lot of people who enjoy dry hash and the way it cures. It's going to change the terp profile. We've seen doing testing at Whistler Medical Marijuana, you seem to lose a lot of terpenes in the drying process if it's not done really well. If you dry it too fast or in an uncontrolled environment, you're losing much more terpenes. So we've kind of done some experiments with more rudimentary drying. We weren't really caring about preserving the terpenes. We just kind of wanted to get cannabinoid tests. But what we noticed is that we were getting a ratio of terpenes to cannabinoids that was lower in the hash than the dry bud. And we thought that was kind of strange. And then when we went to dry it in a freeze dryer, that ratio was higher. So we've had some freeze-dried hashes that were 10% terpenes and 70% cannabinoid. So the freeze drying definitely can preserve some of that, but I think we're going to see maybe more advanced drying techniques that involve environmental control of the room that can preserve the terpenes and still get that nice flavor of the air-dried or the cured hash. And I think, going back a little bit, what he was talking about with the differences between, soil nutrients, you also have the microbiological, microbes in the soil that are going to determine some of the flavors and the terpenes as well. So there you have the terroir where you have different bacteria in different locations, and that's really going to affect those sort of things. But what we're really working towards is bringing the extractors to the farm site or to the farm scale, because that's how we're really going to get a more reasonable price for these extracts. I mean, high quality bubble hash or dry sift is pretty expensive right now, and what we really want to do is bring that down for the consumer to a really reasonable price. And when you look at outdoor cultivation, if we mechanized cannabis production the same way that corn or grain is harvested, the production cost will probably be $1 a kilogram or less. So then your gram of hash is costing a penny to produce. So it's going to be a big change to the market when you actually have large-scale outdoor production. So part of what we're working on is cannabis harvesting technology, a cannabis combine, to go into the fields, cut down plants, separate the buds from the stalk, and then put them directly into hash production. And we're really seeing that, people often, oh, we're going to get a CO2 machine or we're going to get a hash machine. I think you're going to see when you move to these farm scales that it's a bit of both. I like to pull an analogy to olive oil production, in that, olive oil production, most olive oils are first cold pressed and then solvent extracted to take out what's left. And I think we'll probably end up seeing a similar thing with cannabis, where you have rosin or you have bubble hash or dry sift. You're taking your first pass high quality product out, and then what's left over is sent to another extractor or done in-house with solvents, and then you're going to get your isolates and things that you're going to use for different product types.
Yeah, I definitely see that. So just in Washington State, as much as I would love to run top-end buds, right, or even the B-grade buds, unfortunately, in order to make a product that's cost-effective for the consumers, because ultimately in Washington and other states, they stratify the ownership between producers, processors, and retailers. In order to produce quality products at a high enough grade, you're going to end up having different price gradients. You're going to, I would, in the same way that you see alcohol with, malt liquor being relatively cheap per gallon, all the way up to scotches, which are, up to hundreds of dollars a liter. Those are going to be the ones that are going to have to be produced organically with more labor, just because you have to take care of the plants better. Because in order to, it's easy to produce CBD isolate material. It's really hard to produce CBD full spectrum oil that has a wonderful terpene profile. Less than 10% of this CBD farmers are producing something that I can extract and would want to consume as a crude oil. Because just the name of the game in that realm is producing CBD distillate or isolate, so they can sell it as a export or put it in a vape pens or manufactured products. Now, as a consumer, and I know that that CBD hemp is going to be more medicinally active if it has that broad spectrum of terpenes, as well as a broader spectrum of cannabinoids. And that's something that as we as farmers have access to land-raised cultivars, we can start to refine, re-sift out those rare cannabinoids, identify those double recessive traits that produce those really unique profiles, and really preserve them and bring them into cultivation methods where they have that soil microbiome. Because without the soil microbes, you're not going to have the precursors of those essential oils that feed the trichomes. And we've seen that. So I totally agree with what we see in Washington. Some of the best farmers will process their own material, whether it be sift or bubble, and then the lower grade materials or their failed harvests that they can't sift, they'll end up sending to processors. And you know, you can produce safe according to the state products, and they will pass lab testing. But you know, there was a paper that was written partially by myself, I just did the extracting, but Michelle Sexton wrote a paper looking at various different types of, I think 5 different plant terpene profiles plus cannabinoid profiles spread across 5 or 6 different processors in the state. And every one of the processors produced different ratios. Further developing, doing R&D, I've been able to run different systems and produce vastly different terpene or cannabinoid profiles with just doing subtle changes on the extractors. So what you'll end up seeing is, you know, a lot of the really expensive large-scale extractors are going to mostly go into manufactured products, but you know, the highest return to the farmer, which is what we're here for, is going to be trying to produce that scotch in the industry and not the malt liquor.
So I just wanted to bring it back to what Daniel was referring to earlier with the combines in the field. I think we should call that farm to bowl. I think that would be very good. And then I thought maybe I'd bring it back a little bit into the science of the glandular trichomes. I never realized, like, I never know what level the people that I'm talking to are at, and I kind of always assume, you know, especially in this particular, that there'd be a pretty high level of knowledge in regards to the trichomes and the production of the cannabinoids and terpene profiles, but I thought seeing it is the Science of Regenerative Soil Conference, we should maybe throw a little bit of science in there. So there are 3 different types of glandular trichomes. One of the reasons why, you know, I think we would see a lot more on-par extraction with water extraction and dry sifting. You know, the majority of people, I don't know what the percentage is, but the majority of people have, over the years, grown cannabis to turn it into money. And so that's why the oil community was always so much more successful in gaining people like, oh, I want to just blast my stuff because I get this huge 25% yield, and you know, you're seeing a much smaller percentage yield with water extraction and dry sifting. And the reason that is because of these 3 different types of trichomes. So we have the glandular trichome, which is quite a tall trichome on a long capitate stalk, and then there's one about half that height called the capitate sessile. And those are both really what we smoke when we are using water hash and when we're using dry sift. The 3rd type of trichome, which is the trichome that is present immediately from the seed cracking and the cotyledon opening and the epicotyl, the first set of true leaves, the serrated leaf that comes out of the cotyledon. You can macro photograph those, and there are bulbous trichomes present. I always let people know that say they only spray in veg, that those trichomes are present from the beginning of the plant till the end of its life. Those trichomes are not available to us through mechanical screen separation. They are generally the difference in the yield that you'll see from a bubble hash to a solvent extraction. So if you're getting a 20, you know, sometimes you'll get 20 is a very good water extraction return, but sometimes people might be getting 10 or 12, and then they'll see this, you know, 15 to 20% returns with solvent extracts, and that's because the bulbous trichome, it has no stalk. Well, that's not true. It sits on a single stipe cell, that is not visible to us with our human eyes or even any of the macro lenses I've ever seen. Maybe an electron scan microscope, if you got low enough, you might be able to see that cell. But it doesn't break off because of the way it's growing on the leaf. It doesn't, we can't extract it mechanically. It doesn't become brittle and break off the neck of the stalk. And because of that, it's generally something that gets left behind when you're using water extraction or dry sifting. And because of that, especially because, I mean, I should have said this right off the start. All we do is we unveil the flame, but you are the producers of the flame. And we are truly nothing without great growers. And I think I speak for the majority of the people on the panel here that, you know, for us, we're interested in getting the highest quality cannabis that we can acquire. The question I've had from water extractors over the years has been, well, how do I get my hash to melt like yours? And that's, I tell them, I'm like, that's done in the grow room. That's done with your genetics. That's done, you know, with the love that you choose to give the plant. And it's certainly not happening, you know, in a basement with a bunch of general hydroponics and visiting the grow once or twice every week. It's the people, you know, like the people that are at this conference and the organic growers that really are a little bit more committed than just wanting to grow cannabis for cash, but to grow cannabis for truly the most exceptional expressions of cannabinoid and terpene profiles. And so I wanted to say that we merely unveil the flame. You guys are the ones that are producing it, and you know, as you have a very high integrity in this industry in particular, it's hard not to notice that the profit margins always seem to be lower. And as people lower their integrities, they see this profit margin go higher. And so the reason why I didn't speak at the LIFT conference, but did speak at this conference, is pretty much because I know I'm speaking to a room full of people with high integrity and that they want to learn about growing cannabis in a way that is important, that there are things that we, you know, that there's sustainability that needs to be involved, and that we can't just, you know, not think of these things in the way that we're producing cannabis and in the way that we're producing extracts, because, you know, a lot of us have been touched deeply by the cannabis plant, and it's been a guiding light in our life. And so I think it's very, very important for conferences and gatherings like this to share as much information as we can about, hey, there's other ways to do this. You know, it doesn't have to be a shit ton of chemicals sprayed from the start to the finish. And so I just wanted to sort of voice that and say that I'm very stoked to be able to talk with you all today and kind of give you a little bit of background on myself and my history with water extraction, and then give you, I guess I wanted to get into a little bit about how cannabinoids and terpenes are synthesized inside the glandular trichome. So you have those 3 different types of trichomes. They're all really little laboratories with all sorts of different chemicals going on in there. The 2 main ones, they're both organelles. They're called plastids and vacuoles. And if you picture a big circle, which is the trichome head, in the middle section of it, on one side you would have the plastid, and on the other side you would have the vacuole. And these are producing phenols, which are alcohols, and hydrocarbons, which are the terpenes. And so the production of the terpenes and the phenols pushing up into the upper membrane of the trichome, there's a fibrous mat in there, and there's all sorts of wonderful things that go on when the UVB and the different light frequencies shine down and cook down those phenols and those hydrocarbons. And what they do is they produce CBGA. That's the first compound that is produced that is a cannabinoid, and from CBGA you get a whole variety of, basically all of the cannabinoids, all of the terpene profiles are built through the production of the phenols and the hydrocarbons. So for me, I've always been most interested not in the production of vegetative yields, because to me that's just the pizza box that carries the actual pizza, which to me is the glandular trichomes. I love the idea, and why I love the idea of the living soil and organics is that, you know, what we're really doing when we're growing cannabis and producing these incredible expressions is we are producing as many of those phenols and hydrocarbons within the vacuoles and the plastids that are going to produce the cannabinoids and the terpene expressions that we're looking for. So just a little bit of science there.
Yeah, in an evolutionary perspective, the plant evolved to produce those bulbous heads, the sisal heads, all of the trichomes as a way to protect themselves against a couple of main insects, potentially molds, depending on the terpenes that are produced in those. So there was an evolution that happened within the plant that selectively, it's positively selected for the production of those terpenes. Now, that explains some of the terpenes, but why did it produce neuroregulatory compounds for our brains? Because they wanted to build a relationship with us. And well, yeah, all primates consume this, even if they're not hungry. And in an evolutionary perspective, I believe everything that has a nervous system, so a spine, which dates all the way back to the sea squirts, you actually see endocannabinoid receptors. So all of the neurons within people's spines and neuroregulatory systems have to be regulated. And in an evolutionary standpoint, they were first regulated, endocannabinoids within our body, but then as plants started producing those compounds, they found that they had a selective advantage toward building relationships within us. We're not living in an environment that's culturing one species, because the success of that one species of cannabis is critically dependent on all the other species around it. And the nice part with producing high-end hashes, a lot of it's done in a more labor-intensive way, but a much more sustainable way. I'm much happier when I spend a day breaking buds up over screens or pulling bags of hash out of water than I am when I'm doing R&D runs that could potentially blow up and call the fire department. So a lot of that requires spending millions of dollars on making stuff safe. Whereas moving forward, as we have multiple farms, every farmer wants to be able to produce some amount of hash that they can market themselves. But as the products kind of roll in, you're going to have lots that have insect infestations that you may not want to wash. So you can then find local processors that use sustainable manufacturing practices to process the material. That was one of the big reasons why I switched from hydrocarbons to CO2. And CO2 has a long way to go before it's competing on the level of hydrocarbons for extracts. But there's a lot of developments that are only available in a few number of states because investors are more than happy to waste money on training and developing tech, but you have to be able to source the quality material and get manufacturers that love what they're doing to either process the hash or process the extracts, right? I love what I'm doing, so it's something that every day I don't work. Even if it's relatively unsafe, but in safe environments, then you got to be able to love what you do. The more that we can promote things that are more sustainable and safer, and that's why I think that a lot of farmers are going to start to shift towards that high-end product lines, producing things like bubble hash, dry sieve, because you can produce it as an ancillary product to your flower products on your farm, and then take the water out of the bubble hash and water your plants with it. And you are then infusing your environment with those terpenes, which is going to not only feed the soil microbacteria back, you're feeding the cannabis plant back to it, but then you can take your spent biomass and inoculate it with decomposers, fungal primarily, but depending on how you're trying to incorporate it into your nutrient system, you can inoculate it with bacterial. You can even ferment the spent biomass. Yeah, totally. Produces methanol. Does anybody have a flex fuel vehicle? You guys are still buying gas? Seriously? It took a million years to make gas, and you can make your own gas for $1 a gallon out of your spent biomass. So as the hydrocarbon labs and old material labs have spent rotovapes and learn how to make moonshine, and then you can start fermenting your own hemp ethanol or fermenting your own hemp beer, distill that off, have some hemp ethanol that you can take your spent biomass from your bubble hash or sift line and then wash the residual bulbous glands out of.
I saw a few blank faces there. I was talking about flex fuel vehicles. For those of you who don't know, flex fuel vehicles are vehicles that can drive on any mixture of methanol, ethanol, and gasoline. So you can put in any mixture of those three compounds and your car will run. The funny thing is every gasoline engine is a flex fuel engine, and the difference is a computer change in the car's system to make it run on gasoline or methanol. It costs about $150. So in Brazil, where they have a lot of sugarcane, you go to the gas station, you can choose to buy ethanol or you can choose to buy gasoline, and ethanol is a lot cheaper. So there's a lot of easy ways that you can make your life more sustainable, and cannabis can help that way. And so going back to talking about this sort of like small circular system for organic growers, one of the biggest benefits for bubble hash to the small producer is you don't need to dry the material. Drying is when you can run into a lot of problems. You need that space, it needs to be a clean space and a controlled environment. With the bubble hash, you can take your plant, cut it down fresh, throw it right into your water extractor. You can freeze it and extract it later. What comes out of the bubble hash extractor, as I talked about before, you could dry that in an oven or in a fast way and then use that for ethanol extraction. And the biomass that's left over after that, there's all sorts of different uses. And the water from the hash, I'm sure you could feed that back to the plant. So really thinking about how you're going to build a system that's all integrated, not just the growing, but the extraction, and even the packaging. One of the things I'm really interested in is hemp composite packaging and compostable packaging, because you see with the LPs, they have all this packaging that's required, right? Why can't we make that compostable? We can, but it just has to be the will there, the will from consumers to demand that product, and from producers to be able to make it. And we have all that technology, but it's just going to take a bit of time for that to catch up. And that's really where it should be. You take your cannabis out of its package and you toss the package in the compost, and it turns back into more cannabis. It's a great cycle.
Yeah, we've seen tons of states that pass laws trying to make stuff child resistant, child proof, and it creates a ton of waste, and that's something we cannot, as an industry, stand for. We have to be able to offer alternatives, and more importantly, as consumers and producers, offer those alternatives, because I'm telling you, just as a personal note, probably 50 to 100 retailers in Washington will buy and pay a premium for more sustainable packaging. So produce it out of hemp. We're now starting to have that acreage to be able to supply the hemp paper. I've seen hemp plastics, I've seen hemp packaging for the markets. You gotta look for it, but if you can find it and put your products in it, you're gonna be able to maintain a higher quality product, sell it in a better packaged product, and not worry about spending as much money on putting a fancy picture on your product, because what you're putting in your body should speak for itself.
I guess to change the subject a little bit, I just thinking when they were talking, another really important reason why, not only getting away from salts, but growing organically and making sure you're aware of what's in your soil. That back in 1994-95, when we got our first license to grow hemp, there was a competing group in Ontario, Joe Strobel and Jeff Kine. One was a tobacco farmer and one was a lawyer. And they grew the first hemp field in Canada in almost 80 years or something. We got the first one in Manitoba in 95, but they got the first license in 94. And they were Joe was a tobacco grower, and if you're familiar with tobacco, I'm sure it's the same in Canada as it is in the US, that they spray a radioactive nucleotide called radium-226 on the tobacco fields. This raises nicotine levels, which is illegal even for tobacco companies to do in a lab, but of course, being evil, they just figured out that, hey, we'll call it a pesticide, we'll spray this shit in level 6 hazmat suits all over the fields. And so the year after Joe grew his hemp field was really the year that we all became aware of the phytoremediative properties of cannabis and how much shit that cannabis will pull up out of soil. It was pulling up radioactive nucleotides out of his tobacco field on a level that was frightening to them. Now they're forced by law to measure their radioactivity levels like two times a year. I think it's every 6 months. And so after they grew the hemp field, they measured his field and they found that their radioactive levels were way, way low. And that actually spawned a group that I was involved with at the time, Consolidated Growers and Processors in Manitoba, to do a project in Chernobyl and to use hemp as a way of cleaning up the Chernobyl mess and all of those radioactive nucleotides. So it's very, very, very important that not only are you aware of the teas and whatnot, but really you want to know what's in your soil. And I think it's why it's so important what DEM, Dragonfly Earth Medicine, are doing in regards to just sort of creating, you know, some certification that we know that, like, cannabis, and we often call, you know, we say things like, oh, cannabis is a medicine, so it has to be grown, you know, to the highest level. It's like, I don't know what planet you guys are living on, but the planet I live on, medicine is toxic fucking poison. We need to figure out a new name for cannabis, because I get where we're coming from, but like, we're comparing it to medicine, which is basically killing the population at an accelerated rate. The word pharmaceutical, if you drop the P, is H-A-R-M. It's in the first 5 letters of the word, pharmaceuticals. And so I don't think we should be comparing it to medicine as we know, but really sort of, and it's the same kind of reason why when I coined the phrase bubble hash, you know, I wasn't doing it to try and be like, I coined the phrase bubble hash. I was just like, I didn't think what it was attuned to what people knew of what hash was. When people back then heard about what hash was, it was, you know, it was an import from Morocco or Afghanistan, and it certainly wasn't like 99.9% glandular trichomes. And that was really the sort of the interest that I had in renaming and creating a new language for what we call this product. And I think it's pretty important that we figure out a way to do it with the term medicine too, because it's been bastardized by these pharmaceutical companies, and yeah, it's not very medicinal.
So I was interested in this whole medicine versus medicinal thing. You know, why are our medicines, as Mark is saying, harming people or the environment and not really producing better health? And what it came down to is actually the philosophy of medicine today is reductionism. They believe that if we break everything down to the smallest component, they're going to figure out what's wrong. And it was really powerful, especially 100 years ago when most of our diseases were nutrient deficiencies or you know, infections. You know, they discovered antibiotics and vaccines and vitamins, and it was like, oh, well, we're going to cure all these diseases with single molecules. And then they got to more complex diseases like cancer and heart disease, and you've got environmental factors and genetic factors and lifestyle factors, and then how we're going to develop a new molecule that never existed before to fix those health problems. It doesn't really make sense. So organic agriculture of our medicine. So going back, medicine is defined as something that is supported by the current evidence and medical community. So it's a consensus among scientists and doctors of what makes something a medicine. And medicinal definition is something that has healing properties. So the problem we have today is medicine used to be medicinal plants, and now it's single molecule drugs. So what we're really trying to do is take back medicine to the medicinal plants, and what we need to do is prove to the medical community that these things work, and you know, they're good for us. So one of my other venture is Whistler Therapeutics, and that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to take organic, sustainably produced medicine and bring it through those hurdles so it can get to a wider audience. And for some people, you know, growing their own is going to be great for them. Actually growing cannabis is a therapeutic act in itself. So getting in with the soil, getting exposed to those microbes, that's all been shown to have health promoting properties. But at the same time, someone who has a serious illness like cancer, they don't have time to go home and grow that. We need to produce something and something that we know is going to work well for their condition. And so we're really looking to put that marriage together of organic agriculture and true medicinal plants with the study of medicine. And that's something that is, you know, I think we're witnessing that revolution right now, and it's going to be quite amazing.
So what I would say in regards to what he just said was we need to take the harm out of pharmaceuticals and put back in the farm. drop the PH, put an F at the front. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and obviously creating medical products, right? We need to be able to offer products. We can't, current governmental laws limit the amount of medical claims that we as business owners can make, but that doesn't mean that we cannot produce healthy products. There's nothing saying you can't produce a product that you formulated to treat your family's diseases or your friends' diseases and offer them to a greater public. Because the greater public's going to pick up on what they're developed for, and they're going to preferentially buy them when they start hearing their friends are getting cured. And it's going to be able to usurp what we see and waste a ton of money on, which is lawyers in the medical industry, which are unneedlessly paid. So we need to be able to develop products. Obviously, every one of us who are product manufacturers make some topicals, get some hemp oil, make some lotion, make some soap out of it, right? And make some edibles if you can, just for R&D. It's more difficult to do them in a commercial setting, but you want to be able to saturate your endocannabinoid system multiple different ways. And your skin's a huge organ. You're being able to eat it is great, because then you can actually maintain a level dose for longer periods. But as producers choose those products, if you're going to produce food, produce it using gluten-free ingredients. My girlfriend has scoliosis and cannot buy anything with dairy. That cuts out 80% of Washington's edibles. She also doesn't like to buy grains, and since Washington doesn't allow shelf non-perishable foods, most stuff has grains. So that really cuts out her edible products. We buy extracts and manufacture our own edibles at home. But what you're going to end up seeing as producers and processors is that being able to produce those niche products that are paleo or vegan or gluten-free are going to be find a niche, find loyal customers, and be far more sustainable, because I don't produce an organically sourced edible, organically sourced topical is going to be able to treat your community, as well as be able to develop product lines for people that you care about.
And you can't make any claims about the effect of the product on a person's health, but you can on the environment. So you don't want to make any false claims, but building a sustainable company is something that you can use for your marketing. And it's definitely going to be interesting to see how the market reacts. And I think, looking at the quality of cannabis coming out from organic operations, it really speaks for itself. And the consumers are going to realize that, and in the end, it can actually be a lot cheaper to produce. You're not having to produce a lot of synthetic chemicals or packaging for those nutrients that you're going to put into your system. You're taking natural ingredients and integrating it within the local ecosystem. So for people who are looking at geographic brands, so Whistler Medical Marijuana has done really well with their geographic brand, and people might think it's just branding, but really, when you're an organic producer, you're taking those things from the local environment, farm products from Pemberton, things from the coast of BC, like kelp and seashells, and all these things are coming together to make that product. So if you're really, in a unique location, that's also a great way to build your brand and really focus on that organic part, because you are taking part of that environment and then presenting it to people. Whereas people producing hydroponically from oil, all their cannabis is coming from the same place, is from oil. Or synthetic chemicals. A lot of those nutrients might come from natural sources that aren't oil, but a lot of it is petrochemicals, and that's where the nitrogen is coming from. You're getting your oil from the Haber process, or your nitrogen from the Haber process, and that's releasing a whole bunch of carbon dioxide. So, cannabis can help patients, but if you're producing it with petrochemicals and coal power, you're not helping anybody in the long run.
Yeah, and there's a ton of different regions, regions in Washington that are producing tons of apples, and farms in that area that are taking those apples, incorporating them into their food. You can actually taste some of that apple in it. I know farms in Cali that are incorporating grape pomace, so that after they press the grapes for wine, they'll take all of that, turn it into compost, and then you can taste those terpenes that contribute to this soil compost in the flower. And that's a wonderful thing that you can start marketing. Grown in whatever region your terroir be, and incorporate in the same way that you see on wine bottles pictures of different fruit trees or nut trees or regions. Being able to taste that region is going to be able to stick with your consumer far better than many of the other kind of traps that the capitalist system trying to force it down people's throat, doing good marketing, right? You got to give them credit, but at the same time, I would prefer to buy and pay a premium for a simple bottle that is well produced than a fancy bottle that isn't. But a ton of people pay that premium for the fancy bottle. A lot of the educated guys pay the premium for the simple bottles.
So yeah, we've been chatting up here for a little over an hour. I thought maybe you guys might have questions, so maybe we could open it up to you guys if you do have any questions. If not, we could wrap it up and do a bunch of dabs. Whatever you guys want. If you guys got questions, by all means, I'm sure we can figure out a way. You can walk up here and talk with the mic so everyone can hear you. Do you want to come up here and just sort of?
I can speak loud.
You have a great loud voice.
Yeah.
All right.
So you guys have mentioned that terpene development is increased when it's sun-grown, organic. I know that's something that's kind of come out amongst the community. Following a little bit towards like rosin pressing, I've noticed that there may be a bit of a correlation between terpene quantity and actually accessible yield of cannabinoids, because the terpenes act as kind of a vessel, or I guess a co-solvent in pushing that out. Thank you. Do you think that that's just like when moving into concentrates, the concept of sun-grown organic rosin is, I mean, the bonus is going to be in the flavor, but also for the producers, the yield is going to be quite a bit more significant?
As a rosin consumer, absolutely. Here's how the chemistry works. So, terpenes have lower melting points than cannabinoids do. So, by applying heat and pressure with a higher terpene content, the terpenes are going to solve the cannabinoids and act as solvents to carry the cannabinoids out. Now, if you do not have those terpenes present, you will have to apply more heat, more pressure to reach the melting point of those cannabinoids in order to exude them. More moisture within them. So there's going to be a lot of product development within pressing rosin. It's a wonderful thing that you can do on a small to mediocre scale, up to a commercial scale for craft farmers, which is wonderful. And to be honest, it's a much more sustainable way of producing it than trying to get Class 1 certifications, because Class 1 certifications are a pain in the ass, especially when you're rural. So I think my favorite's doing sift, because I aged sift for years and press it a few years later to see how it tastes from one season into the next. And tastes on pressed rosin do change. I found that in the Tricome, it protects the oils more than after you press it. Natural vaporization of those essential oils. So if you're going to be storing hash, you'll want to store it for however long you want before you press it. But if you for your question, it totally works out that the more terpenes you have in your starting material, whether it be making bubble or hash before you press it, or just press the buds, those terpenes act as a solvent due to their lower melting point and lower boiling point.
Cool.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now that we're on the topic of pressing dry sift years later, have you guys ever found that when you make bubble or you make dry sift and then kind of apply like lava technique to it, roll some talos above it, then age that in like a cold environment, that you get potency changes over like when you go from like year 1 to year 2 to year 3?
I wouldn't say that there's potency changes, but as the terpenes age and blast off, evaporate off, they're very volatile. And I'm sure you've seen it with even your own cannabis, that sometimes bouquets that are sitting there, they're multiple layers down, and there's different types of terpenes. There's monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes, and so some of them are much more volatile. They volatilize much quicker, and often when you remove those ones, they're so present. They're the ones that are giving you this particular high. They're really the ones that are the most, responsible for the modulating effects of the cannabinoids that are present in that particular hash. And when they evaporate off, they volatilize off into the air, and now a new profile sort of takes its place. You could definitely see a different high. The cannabinoids aren't becoming more potent, in my opinion.
They're in low oxygen, low temp, you're going to have minimal degradation. Any amount of oxygen, heat, UV light will cause about a 5% degradation per month, respectively. Now, you can take that. I've been able to minimize that to less than 5% a year by keeping it in sift in dark and climate-controlled environments. But what you will see, the biochemistry of what's going on, I would assume is not well studied, but there has to be some biosynthesis between different terpenes as they interact with the air around it. There's been a couple of research papers, we've all possibly heard the one. There was a novel compound found a couple of years ago called hashishene. It was a degraded form of myrcene. So as myrcene in Afghani hash was aged, that myrcene catalyzed with another monoterpenoid during the evaporation of that monoterpenoid to create a random molecule they then called hashishene. So there is going to be some biosynthesis. It needs to be better studied, but it certainly sounds like a wonderful way to create different marketable products that have been aged different ways.
You could possibly see some decarboxylation. So as Marcus said, you're not going to really gain a lot of cannabinoid. Maybe if you lose 2% of your terpene content, then your cannabinoid content goes up by a little bit, but that's not really going to be that noticeable. But sometimes with decarboxylation, if you're smoking the hash, let's say, and you have a product that's already has a lot of decarboxylation, you might end up having it a bit more bioavailable. So it might seem to you that the potency's gone up, but maybe just the way you're smoking it after you age it, you're just getting more into your body. So there's a whole ton of variables that would go into it.
Have any of you guys done any with the Bugitas in bags and with flour, and done any research or quantified that?
I mean, I haven't done as much. I'm more of a hash guy. I don't play with flowers too often. The one thing that I would say in regards to aging sift, when I first started hanging out with Skunkman Sam, he had some dry sift that was about 10 years old. This was in around 2000, 2001. And I got to smoke that dry sift in 2001, 2002, 2000. I got to smoke it from the time it was 10 till the time it was almost 20 years old. And it was, it really depends on when you talk about aging hash, like how you're going about doing that, because that's going to affect how those terpenes volatilize. So people all the time, they're like, oh, I'm gonna age my hash in my freezer. I'm like, no, you're gonna preserve your hash in your freezer. You're not gonna do much aging, but there are a variety of ways. And over the years, I've done a ton of different experimenting with, because I've just had so much hash. I've been able to be like, oh, I'll put this in glass, I'll put this in wood, I'll leave this out on my counter, I'll throw this in the fridge, I'll throw that in the freezer, and then I'll age it for like 10 plus years. I think my oldest hash is about 15 years old right now. And that one's actually sitting under my monitor on my computer right now. It's just like, it's nice. It's like real nice. With hash in particular, pressed hash, what happens is the outer layers of the hash become very leathery and they protect those inner layers of the hash. So that's really what the aging process is happening. So if you really want to try some beautifully aged hash, often you want to kind of peel back that outer layer and get into the inside, especially when it's 10 or 15 years old, and kind of dig that out, because on the outside, you're looking at, that hash, the dry sift, it was unpressed. By the time it was 19 years old, it had no terpenes left whatsoever. It was not very tasty, but the thing that I found that was very unique about it was the fact that it was a complete and total creeper. It was like 5 or 10 minutes after you smoked it is when you felt it. And then 15 to 20 minutes after you smoked it, you were like, holy shit, I'm like really high right now. And that was like, I hadn't really experienced that since I was like much younger, like 16 or 17-year-old. I'm sure you guys all heard about that creeper weed, where you're like, man, it's the creeper weed. It's like I puffed it, I thought I wasn't high, and I got high like 10 or 15 minutes later. So, you know, it shows the importance of the terpenes and how they carry the cannabinoids in through our mucous membrane and into our lungs, and it's this immediate feeling. And when you reduce the terpenes out of it, you don't get that immediate feeling with cannabinoids often. There really is sort of a delay to it.
Have you tried curing it all in other gases, such as nitrogen, or vacuuming out all the air and then replacing it with other gases? And then what gases have you experimented with? And then have you had any results, plus minus, one way or the other?
Yeah, so I've tried several different inert gases, both argon, neon, nitrogen, as well as CO2 mixes, CO mixes, oxygen mixes. Oxygen is the worst thing that you want to gas in your plants, for obvious reasons. Nitrogen is wonderful. What I have seen is it reduces the evaporation due to the low oxygen environment, but it does affect the smell. There was also, Josh kind of mentioned with the different humidor packs, so storing your flower or storing your hash at different humidities and different temperatures are going to increase or decrease the metabolism by the biosynthesis that occurs. Those different packs actually will absorb some of the monoterpenes, which is good for curing the outer stuff. But in flower, obviously you're losing a little bit of the monoterpenes. The trade-off is a little bit more moisture that keeps your bud more pleasurable during the smoking. And then what my preference is with the hashes is minimal moisture, minimal temperature if I'm just trying to store it. But as I'm trying to smoke it, I'll actually keep it at room temperature because I get more volatilization in the oils when I actually go to squish it, which fortunately kind of causes that greasing effect in some of the bubble hashes or sips. But I keep, that week's or day's consumption in a small jar and have the rest of it stored in kind of climate controlled or minimal oxygen environments to kind of protect it. I've also worked with a lab that's been aging hash in oak barrels, whiskey barrels, wine barrels. It definitely affects the flower. It partially affects the hash, but that was something that needs to be developed. I wouldn't recommend using anything that has dark tannins, but anything that has light fluids actually will impart those terpenes into the hash. Whether or not you want to make that a business choice, make sure you source that wine barrel from an organic farm. Last thing you want is, I've actually heard of edibles testing hot for pesticides, not because of the cannabis, but because of the food ingredients. So we want those food ingredients to be organic if we're going to claim the rest of our products are all natural or organic. So
the testing is so far advanced for the cannabis now that we're seeing some organic inputs that have pesticides in them, but at such low levels that it probably wasn't exposed to the pesticides, but it was a cross exposure. So it's something to be really careful with your soil and any of your inputs, that doing a pesticide test, especially in Canada, the last thing you want is to get to the end and test your crop and you use some cocoa coir that had pesticides in it, and this happens. So not just your food ingredients, but all of your soil ingredients as well, because they can be there in background rates. Like in California, the regular soil in a lot of places, not even near farms, wouldn't pass the microbutanol regulations in Canada. So you really have to be careful with your inputs, and especially with extracts, you can end up concentrating those pesticides. So having a good quality management system to begin with, and thinking about this, like all of your inputs that are coming in, if it's from a new supplier, ask for a certificate of analysis or do some analysis yourself.
Trust but verify, right?
Yeah, and with the Boveda packs, I haven't done it for hash, but for the flower, they've been pretty good at maintaining the moisture. That's more on like a personal consumption level, but I know speaking with the growers at Whistler Medical Marijuana, they are quite useful, and they can, at some respects maybe absorb some of those monoterpenes, but stopping the fluctuation in the moisture levels. Every time you lose moisture in your cannabis, you're losing terpenes with it. And so if you then try and re-moisturize it and then it loses that moisture again, you're losing terpenes each time. And the Boveda pack really just keeps it at the same humidity, so it's not losing humidity out of the trichome, pulling the terpenes out as well. More questions?
So the wine barrel thing, a lot of those wines tested, they got Eagle 20 on them, so they're really caution against doing that.
Oh, totally.
But I'm really interested in just kind of and this kind of beyond the realm, but I think of cheese, right? So we were doing testing in Washington on the hash, and I testing at different stages, and at one time we had gotten like a microbial test that failed after the flowers and the hash had already passed. And we thought, well, maybe it was how we stored it. But then we kind of got into that, maybe not. So just kind of floating this out there, right? Think about cheese and how we make cheese and it sits and there's different bacteria that are interacting with
Noble
it.
rod.
Hash has got to have its own
Absolutely.
organic stuff that's on there. So I think when we were failing that test, it was a test that wasn't made to test hashish. It was a test for something else that they applied to the hashish. It picked up something that, for whatever, but I think there's something going on there that we don't quite know about.
So in the wine industry, they call it noble rot. Noble rot is kind of, they will actually inoculate the grapes with a fungal bacteria that starts metabolizing the sugars in the grapes. That makes and when they then press it, it makes the wine sweeter. Obviously, cheese is a great example. There are many different ways that you can, using nature, biosynthesize new and novel compounds. So to think that that is not happening within the cannabis plant would be rudimentary. I've actually heard results of novel cannabinoids being formed, but they've only been identified in cultivars that failed microbial tests, which leads me to believe that there may be microbial inoculations that are going to create novel cannabinoids. We have yet to find that and research it, fully develop it, and fully understand it. There will have to be several research papers to do that. But I would assume that there's going to be different, vintages and different processing, and within the cannabis hash realm, you'll end up having different methods of curing it. We're already kind of seeing that with like Frenchie's tech, where he presses it and then puts it in a ball, whereas other people will store it as, Mila likes to store it as kind of more powder.
I like mine micro-encapsulated. It's like, leave them in the heads, do with it as you please afterwards. I like the way they're stored in the heads.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't like to damage the heads until I'm ready to smoke them, but usually I'll break the heads and make it into a puck right when I do smoke it, so the oils vaporize easier. But what we don't understand is the soil microbiology, right? We're just starting to scratch the surface with how many different microbes contribute terpenes to the cannabinoid plants. Well, why isn't that happening on the surface as well, whether they be within the trichomes, within the surface of the stomata, or living symbiotically within the leaf and full plant matter?
I would say on the microbial front, that a negative microbial test doesn't mean your cannabis doesn't have microbes. It means the microbes it has don't grow on the plates in the lab. So the vast majority of symbiotic bacteria don't grow in culture. Like most bacteria don't grow in culture. So, we're probably going to move, and a lot of bacteria that might grow in culture aren't dangerous. It doesn't matter that they're there. So I think we're going to move towards specific pathogen testing, E. coli, specific dangerous fungi. And if you're looking at the beneficial bacteria, then you have to move into genetic analysis, doing PCR and kind of doing that work to see what kind of DNA is there, and you'll figure out more about the bacteria.
I just had more of a comment than anything. There's a whole lot of people in this room, and this is a really, really hot topic. It's very important, and right now they're not testing the DNA of the microbials. Please write Health Canada. Please start talking to Health Canada. These laws needs to be changed. They're going to put a lot of stoppages on a lot of the ways that regenerative farming is happening in cannabis. And there's, you know, this many people, and if this many people write Health Canada and say, hey, we want better microbials that make sense for cannabis farmers, then maybe they'll pay attention.
Because a lot of those tests, they're borrowing from other, it's not a specific test designed for this. It catches the wrong things. You may spray your plant with labs.
They
test it and then they
Washington
ding you
for a couple of years.
That doesn't make any kind of sense.
Yeah, when Washington initially wrote their rules and regulations, they created a zero tolerance for microbial tests. That was, to be honest, absolutely ridiculous. So they allowed cancer-causing agents in my solvent extract, but they didn't allow probiotic.
I was talking to a guy, and he's talking to Health Canada about that right now, like living soil beds.
And then they're not listening.
Yeah.
They're not listening right now. And we all need to really start being involved. And I think this is a really important topic because it is a way to gag organic regenerative farmers.
And it's more accurate than just plating agar. As somebody who's
And I
plated.
think our body needs to be able to process microbes and stuff in order to stay healthy. So.
I just heard yesterday at the LIFT conference that they're actually writing the Canadian standards right now. So this would be a very opportune moment to write.
Yes.
Okay. So they're writing them right now, the standards for Canada. So they're writing all the standards for the cannabis regulations right now.
Health Canada doesn't actually set regulations for microbes. It's up to the quality assurance person at the person to choose a pharmacopoeia. And so people are using a pharmacopoeia and they have tests like biotolerant gram-negative bacteria, which is like an outdated thing that used to be a marker for E. coli. Now we can test for E. coli specifically, but we still have these outdated tests on there. My advice for anyone who's moving forward is when you do your genetic selection, don't just test for cannabinoids, test for your microbes because, and I think, as I said, there are beneficial microbes that don't show up in the tests. I haven't done this experiment yet, but I'm pretty sure that you'd be able to inoculate plants. So if you have a sterile clone or a sterile seed, you can inoculate it with the proper bacteria so that it's going to be colonized by a bacteria that doesn't show up in the tests. So, you know, it's always a good thing to test your cultivars, test your different seeds, because it may happen that they have different, you know, endogenous bacteria living with them, and some might plate and some might not plate. So doing that kind of microbial testing is important, and going, you know, back a little bit further, I think it's really interesting about the hash fermentation and having bacteria in there. I think that's going to be a whole another frontier of fermented cannabis and what's going to happen with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it several times. I know Kevin's mentioned it in a few of his videos, but the cannabis that's grown in a microbacterially active environment, and generally speaking, like sun-grown cannabis, it actually preserves longer as well. So I mean, to the point of like good bacteria, I mean, it would kind of almost seem like the biodiversity you're creating in your soil, and as it was mentioned today, kind of being the immune system of the plant, it would definitely be carried through the product. And I mean, that relates to our gut flora as well, which is the second brain. So I mean, if it comes straight from the farm and in the soil and with intentions, we're building that, inadvertently, you're not just helping the plant, but all the way to the end consumer and increasing their health all the way through.
Yeah, when you're looking at fuller application of bacteria, those bacteria are going to colonize, grow mycelial networks within the stomata inside the plant, and in many cases they're going to help protect the plant. Within the soil, there's actually fungal fungal hyphae that will actually wrap around nematodes to help choke out nematodes to reduce the negative ones found in the soil. And ironically enough, we're finding interesting accessible terpenes produced by roots that are probably produced to protect against other root pathogens, whether that be bacterial or insectivorial. But that's something that is not well understood because we aren't actually testing, going out of the way to no farmer wants to go inoculate their garden with a bunch of pests to see which one changes their plant profile. So we have to kind of collect that evidence as we see crop failures due to bioregional crop variability. Every once in a while you're going to have forest fires in Cali, every once in a while you're going to have forest fires in Washington, forest fires in Oregon, forest fires in DC. You're going to have heat waves, chill waves, and having biodynamic soil is going to help protect against those. More so, hopefully. But we are. Go ahead, Ken.
I was going to just throw in about the forest fires is that when we were running competition tests for the competitions we were involved in, we started to see huge failure rates in clusters.
Was that downwind?
Yes, and we mapped it around the fire regions, and we could see that there was material that was kicked up from the fire itself and then spread and distributed, and it invalidated laboratory testing, and it was something that was almost impossible to really control, because when you're talking about a heavy smoke like that and so much particulate in the air, there's no way you can really filter it out. And so it makes it really tough in some of these regions to have a product that you can make through testing when you don't really have any control. And even on indoor operations, they have to, unless they're filtering this to an incredible degree, it's difficult to get that level of particulate out of the system. And it's so much material that's being kicked up from the burning asphalt and rubbers and toxic paint and cars, agricultural waste. So when we saw this huge differentiation in lab failures, it blew my mind, because the cultivators that we were testing were all, when we ran them through, almost all of them were about like 97, 98% of the people that entered the comp was making it through with no chemical adulterants. So we knew that the ethics of the grower was there. So it wasn't about we were catching them using stuff they shouldn't use in the comp. It was material that would never have been applied anyways.
Yeah, so it's just spores not being sterilized during the forest fires.
But the amount of bacterial and fungal problems that were blowing through was amazing. We realized that the amount of material kicked up from the flames lifted this soil and all this contaminant and moved it through the air, and it absolutely just decimated these farms that, even though they didn't have smoke contamination in the way you perceived the smoke, where you didn't taste it or smell it, and you didn't have flame damage from the heat, miles and miles away, your crop was contaminated.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I heard you speak on that. I want to say it was at the Golden Tarp.
Correct.
And it's due, obviously due to the lack of sterilization of the spores. The interesting thing would be, let's try and find some growers within those regions, those clusters, that passed microbial testing. What are the beneficial microbes living on those random cultivars? Because that plant's surface biota is going to be more resistant. And it could be the genetics, it could be the terpenes, or it could be potential microbiome that's living on the polar surface.
I did a sift on a bunch of varieties just to see. At one point there was a testing standard that came out in California called the Berkeley Standard. And the Berkeley Standard was this unbelievably extensive testing, and it was designed really by laboratories to favor indoor production models that they were invested in. And because they were able to convince the politicians that this level of purity was needed, all the dispensary operations adopted it voluntarily until they found out that nobody could actually get cannabis through this process. So what I did is I ran everything in the library to see what would pass this test. And I only had one varietal that could handle that test and pass it. And it was genetically, because we used nothing on the plants. I call it run and dry. That we just actually test the plant in open environment. What does it do on its own with no assistance? And out of about 45 plants, only one of them survived it. And these were all production cultivars of today, the ones that you actually use to generate income. And that singularity just struck me, because I realized that some plants just have natural higher levels of resistance, and that maybe they're inhospitable as a home for certain things. I didn't have the ability to analyze it from that point, but I was doing the research to find things that worked so that you have plants that could work on farms that would absolutely work for you, period. Where you may have wanted choice A, but you can't get choice A to market. You have to use choice D. And a choice at the market is better than product that's sitting in your house or turned into tillage.
Yeah, and obviously, the grocery store is always going to want to have every product that the consumer wants, but the educated consumers are going to go to the farmers markets. They can talk to the farmer, make sure they're getting the highest quality produce that was picked recently. Josh?
I know that washing hash is a big thing, and we've had some farms that have thought, oh, I washed my whole entire farm, and I got this tiny percentage. I was all freaking out. Like, oh my god, my whole thing, like the heads were too small to go through or whatever. And then there's some strains are extremely important for hash, and that's what the whole thing is about. For the right kind of strain that's going to come out the way that you want it. And I've been seeing a lot of people like touching buds, and if it kind of comes off kind of sandy on your fingers, that's like kind of a quick indication that you're on the right track for a really good hash plant. And I'm wondering if you guys can speak to that, or what kind of hash strains people should look for. Bananas, a lot of bananas in California.
Yeah, I know I kind of have an interesting selection. I'm not growing for super dense buds. I'm growing for super leafy plants with lots of trichomes on every single leaf I can. Trying to sell that at a store would be kind of foolish. They don't look that great. But the majority of the material you end up processing is going to be from other farms. So you end up having to take simple material tests, and you hit the head on the nail. Simple tongue test or actually chewing on it, you can feel the granularity. That's a good indication that it has or has not been pre-sifted, has or has not been pre-extracted. Because the last thing an extractor wants to do is extract the last 5% of extractable cannabinoids out. Not saying I haven't done that because it's joint necessity, right? But obviously, if you can take the starting material, shave off the highest quality portions first, and then proportionately try and maximize your yield out of the rest, that's how you can kind of create a broad spectrum of products of different grades.
Hey, there's a quick test you were talking about the jar method, yeah?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So
what I had learned out of this, I learned this the gummy tech for the jar, and that's something that you can do if somebody wants to come out and check your crop. If I was to come out and see, hey, which ones are going to wash well, I would just go and pick, 10 grams, 20 grams of this plant and that plant, put them in a jar with some ice water, give them a shake, and then, within a couple minutes, you'll see if there's nothing on this one. This one's got a decent return. Let's try to wash this one.
And if you want to take that a step further, the whole reason why I released the 1 gallon bubble bag kit is so that you could do exactly what Kai was talking about, but have the 8 bags present so you can actually monitor where the resin glands are capturing in the diameter, the micron size of the screen. And so the 1 gallon bag, it wasn't designed for the home use as much as it was designed for the growers and the breeders, where it was like, here's a tool for you that you can use with your crop. Because it's true, a lot of these, and it goes back to the types of trichomes, because it's not that the trichomes are too small and that they're going through the screens. That's what people tell themselves when they grow resin, that has a lot more bulbous heads than it does capitated sessile stalks. And so we've all seen, GG4 is a huge producer. We've had a cultivar here in BC for over 20 years called the hash plant, the BC hash plant, and it's a super producer of resin. And I've seen cultivars produce like 3 to 4% returns with bags, and I've seen them produce upwards of 20%. So one of the things that we're planning on doing at Embark is really collecting data on this and being able to have not just the water extraction, but all of the different modules from cryoethanol to CO2 to hydrocarbon to water extraction to dry sift to terpene extraction and to rosin, and to be able to start collecting data on these different cultivars, You know, of course, if they're grown by different people, that's going to affect it, but just to start collecting this data, I think one of the things we want to offer as at Embark is that when we deal with growers, LPs, craft growers, you know, we want to be able to say, you know, here's a menu, you know, we're working with a tissue culture company and they've collected all these cultivars that we've done data on, and we'll have a page of cryoethanol and a page of hydrocarbon and a couple of pages of CO2 and bubble hash and rosin, and be able to, you know, purchase the cultivars that you're planning on growing with the actual knowledge of what you're going to be doing with those plants afterwards. So I've been saying this for 20 years. If you focus on the vegetative growth of the plants, you'll grow great vegetation. But if you focus on the glandular trichome of the plant, you'll grow great resin.
Doing some testing at Wisdom Medical, we've seen the extraction efficiency for hash, so that's like the percentage of the THC that you can take out of the plant and get into your hash, vary between 25% to 80%. So yeah, that's a huge variability, and it can really make or break a producer in profitability. So choosing that correct strain and doing your research and development in the beginning, and seeing which strains both yield the best in the grow side and the extract side is going to help a lot in having a sustainable business.
Yeah, and especially dealing with you know, supercritical solvents, I see tons of variation depending on how I run it. Anything from super high terpene extracts all the way to zero terpene extracts. Obviously, my preference is the high terpene one. But there are ways you can run solvents to create pharmaceutically pure compounds, isolates, using either single solvents or multiple different solvents. Either you're just using chemistry or just using physics or using a combination of both. But obviously the highest quality products are going to be naturally produced, naturally processed, and actually pursuing that level of certification. That way you can claim that it's, you know, kosher, clean, green, certified, DEF pure, because then you're going to be able to sell it at a premium product. And in the same way that you see craft beer sold that way, you end up having more terpenes produced, and as that craft grows, you'll end up getting financial support from the publicly traded companies that realize they cannot do what you guys do. You guys in this room that are the growers possess far more IP than many of the people that are trying to maintain on that and make sure you take care of your farms, because that's going to be the building stones and the foundation of the future. And you know, as the big public companies kind of see that we can outcompete them not only on our cost but quality as well, they're going to have to support us, because we're going to be blowing them out of the water. Yeah.
Just ask, are there water soluble terpenes?
Absolutely. Terpene alcohols.
Because
Water soluble.
CO2 extraction, and I'm getting
Yep.
a bunch of.
Totally.
Just smell the bubble water once you run it back.
Yeah. So.
Yes,
When you do CO2 extraction, you actually get a water-soluble, it's called a hydrosol. It comes out milky white, depending on some of the terpene profiles you do, or clear. I've had it come out yellow as well. That's going to be just your strictly water solubles. If you decant them, put them in a little vial, they'll somewhat separate, but a lot of them are going to be super volatile. And the difficult part is it's a combination of terpene alcohols, which are soluble in water, but they form interesting micelles within that solution, and they're going to vaporize off, actually.
Very spicy.
Yeah. So the early generation of CO2 extractors really didn't know how to handle that. So the big thing with CO2 was we didn't have to get rid of the solvent, just got to get rid of the water, right? Well, water has a boiling point, and there's a bunch of terpenes that boil below that boiling point. So a lot of the CO2 manufacturers, CO2 extractors, were inadvertently losing a third of their terpenes by trying to remove that water. Well, there's more than just distillation ways of removing water.
Centrifugal.
So there's 3 or 4 classes of terpenes. One of the big ones I know of is hydrosols. And then some of the monoterpenes are also water soluble. And then there are actually a class of flavonoids. The flavonoids and pigments can also be water soluble.
Just wanted to add that in the early days when I started with water extraction, that when the isolator bags first came out, there weren't a lot of people excited about it, and one of the reasons was that the majority of the cultivars that were getting run through the bags, first of all, there were only 2 bags, so that was a problem in itself, but the majority of the cultivars that were being run through the bags had an enormous amount of these water-soluble terpenes, and so you would end up with this incredible smelling water, but the hash would be kind of so-so. That and the fact that we didn't really know how to dry it, so water would be left behind, and that would kind of make it, less, desirable, exactly. So when I first found the cultivar Rene, which was a fairly popular cultivar on the east coast of Montreal, and they brought it out to BC in the mid-90s. The first time I ran Rene through the bubble bags, the hash smelled and tasted super loud. It was incredible that all this terpene profile didn't transfer into the water. And it was really the first time that I had seen it, and it was really what got people excited about water extraction. And I think that even 20 years later, there's still very little known, and I think that as we start collecting these cultivars and doing more analytical testing, we'll be able to hone in on those cultivars that have these more of an alcohol-soluble terpene rather than one that's going to melt away into the water, stay present in the hash, and yeah, it's just, it's one of the very important factors of water hash. If you're going to be, obviously everyone always wants yield, but the quality is important as well, and if those terpenes are transferring over, water is not being used as a solvent in this particular instance, but it truly is a solvent. It's the universal solvent. And the fact is, when we're done making water hash, the water is never clear at the end. So it's being used as a solvent even though we don't want it to be. And this has been sort of an argument amongst water hash makers over the years, particularly with nicotine naming the hash solventless, which is, it's a misnomer at best because water is a solvent, and then of course the terpenes themselves are also solvents. So there's no such thing as a solventless cannabis extraction. It has solvents in it.
Yeah, it's all organic.
But that kind of goes back to the lexicon, right? Because you also have solvent-free. And so he developed that term to separate from that.
Yes.
And, online you get people that will come on and they'll flash their picture of their melty hash and tag it solventless, and it's solvent-free. There's a difference. Yeah. And that was, trying to separate what we're doing with water and mechanical separation versus anybody that's using it as a chemical separation.
I call it petrochemical free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's gotta be sexy. You gotta have something sexy. It's true. Put petrol in the name.
That water, the water coming out of the ice water bags is really good back as a bubble, like as a tea. Yeah. Like for the garden. Oh yeah.
Phenomenal. Yeah, so recycling the bubble water back in your plant soils is any of those water-soluble terpene alcohols are going to be reabsorbed by your plants or your next cycle, and you'll actually get an added benefit of if those terpenes act as anti-insecticidals. It could help with those.
Is there anything else you can do with the hydrosol that comes off to this? Bottles of it, actually.
There is, the issue is shelf stability that I've seen.
It's sealed?
Sealed is good, but think of making perfumes, think of using it as a potential food ingredient or beverage ingredient. The bigger issue is it's a fraction of the terpenes, not representing the whole plant. So yeah, they're a little bit, I find them astringent, but I actually like them as a face wash. So I'll actually, on my home CO2 processed oils, I'll bring it home and use it as a kind of a face wash because the terpene alcohols actually clean pores. But you get a little bit of a sticky residue afterwards, so you gotta wash it off, take a shower afterwards.
All right.
Do we have any more questions?
I got one for you. You guys played with reverse osmosis versus
Definitely made bubble with both. I wouldn't say that there was any data collected in the sense. I like to be able to, I like reverse osmosis myself. I like, to be able to condition my water and control the pH. But I wouldn't say that, from the beginning, I can use pretty much any water and extract the resin, and it's going to be pretty damn good. But as I've gotten a little bit more in tune and knowledgeable, the cleaner the water, the better. We don't need anything in there getting added into something that we generally vaporize or ignite and inhale into our lungs.
Yeah, I've played quite a bit with pH adjusting water, adding salts, adding co-solvents during water washes, and it always decreases the quality. It can be used for some of the hash oil refining to good measure, but it generally requires some form of post-processing, just to kind of remove those impurities that you're introducing during that step of the extraction. I do believe that pH is going to play a matter in the solubility of the trichomes in the water, but we want to minimize the side reactions. I think we have one question here, and we'll hop back to you, John.
Yeah, I just had a quick anatomy question. You were talking about how there's terpenes mostly coming from the trichomes. So when I'm like rubbing the stem of a vegetative plant, am I just smelling glandular trichomes?
Correct.
So
all of the cannabinoids and all of the terpenes that are produced by the cannabis plant. I mean, there are these triterpenoids that are produced in the roots that Mike mentioned earlier, but every terpene that we're looking for, all of the cannabinoids, and I've had this argument for 20 years, the science at least says that they are produced inside the glandular trichome.
Okay, that was the rest of my question.
And the stalks are covered in resin glands.
When you rub your finger across that stalk, your finger is bursting those glandular trichomes, thereby introducing oxygen into those oils, really allowing oxidization, volatilization, thus allowing those oils to then go over your nostrils, activate your sense.
I've actually made water hash with just stalks. It was the whitest hash I ever made. 400 grams of stalks. And try it, I'm telling you. It's different than trim, and it's different from bud. It's not my favorite, but it's neat.
You had mentioned earlier about using high pH. Actually, we've run into the same gentleman twice. Maybe you guys have tried it. This guy was using high pH water, like 10 or 11, and then doing electrolysis to make those heads separate. Have you guys heard of anyone using electrolysis at all?
I can't comment on that due to non-disclosure agreements. So it is being used in oil refining. I wouldn't suggest going much above a pH of 11 because what ends up happening is a process called saponification. Oils within that are forming the glandular trichome head actually get turned into soap. So you don't want to go too high, but it's
why it foams so much.
Yep.
Those high pHs.
So it's something you don't want to go too high, and then there's actually pHs at high ranges or low ranges that cannabinoids can become soluble in water. So you got to avoid those as well. But most of those are outside the range of what we're trying to stick to. So I think it could be a realm for product development, but something that's going to require a whole bunch of failed and wasted batches. So don't do it with your paycheck. Do it with your phone card.
Dabs.
We'll see you guys in the morning. Thanks for doing that, Church Marcus. This was awesome. Mike, Daniel. Thanks for talking. You guys are awesome.
Oh, fantastic. I am doing thanks for yeah, you got it pretty much. Yeah.
Yo, dude! I just got a hat. Check this out. Hey! Okay, so I gotta go because I'm just out on the fence.